Chapter 8 Tom Makes a Decision. Tom walked far into the forest. He was even further than Mrs. Douglas's house on Cardiff Hill. He decided to rest under a tree and think for a bit. He again wished that he could die. But this idea was soon replaced with the desire to live. There were so many places he could travel to in the world. So many things he could do. He could be a soldier, he could join the Indians, or even better, he could become a pirate and steal money and treasure from people traveling on the sea. He'd be good at that. He'd probably become famous for it too. Then, how would Becky feel about him? She would wish that she had been nicer to him when she had the chance. He decided that he would leave the next morning to begin his life as Tom Sawyer the pirate. Suddenly, he heard someone calling out in the forest. He quickly ran to his secret hiding place where he kept a lot of toys hidden. He found his wooden knife and put it between his pants and his belt. He was now the famous Robin Hood, friend of the poor and enemy of the rich, who had lived over 100 years ago with his army of robbers. Moving quietly and carefully from tree to tree, he told his men to stay where they were. And then his friend Joe Harper came from behind another tree. Tom shouted to him,
"Stop there, stranger! Why have you entered my forest without permission?" "I am Guy of Gisborne,"
replied Joe.
"I go wherever I want to go. Who do you think you are?" "I am the famous Robin Hood, who shall kill you if you don't start behaving friendlier." "If you really are Robin Hood, I'll gladly fight you so that I may become famous for killing you."
They started to pretend to fight. But after a while, Tom became tired and shouted to Joe,
"Let me kill you. You have to. I don't want to die, and I'm stronger than you. Let me kill you." "But that's not in the story. Robin Hood never dies in the story." "Okay, fine."
Joe turned around and let Tom kill him.
"Now, you can be Robin Hood for a while, Joe. Then you can kill me."
Joe liked this idea and happily started to fight Tom again. Soon, Tom was on the ground, pretending to bleed terribly. Joe told him he'd done a good job at dying and that he should be an actor when he grew up. Tom said,
"No, I'm not a good actor. I just believe in dying honorably. And you should always do a good job of dying under the knife of a great man such as Robin Hood."
Chapter 9 A Frightening Night Among the Spirits. That night, Tom lay in bed waiting for Huck to call for him. When he finally heard the sound of a cat outside his window, Tom quietly climbed out of the window and found Huck waiting for him there with his dead cat. They reached the graveyard in 30 minutes, as it was just outside of the village. The night was very quiet, so even the slightest sound made the boys jump from fear. When they had found the grave of Hoss Williams, it was still too early for the spirits to come, so Tom and Huck sat down under some trees nearby. They waited a while without talking, but Tom started to become frightened by the sounds of the night, so he started to talk, hoping he'd forget about them.
"Huck, I bet that old hoss can hear us here." "Yeah, you're probably right. So you should always be careful about how you talk about dead people."
This made Tom think for a little while about all the things he had said about the dead people he'd known. But he was interrupted by the sound of voices.
Did you hear that, Huck?
Huckleberry listened for a moment and said,
Tom, they're coming. Where can we hide? I don't know. Do you think they can see us here? Of course. They can see in the dark. They're spirits. Well, maybe if we don't move, they won't see us. I'm pretty worried, Tom. Be quiet. I think they're getting close.
Then something appeared. It looked like someone carrying a light.
I don't care about my warts anymore, Tom. Let's just get out of here.
Tom put his hands together and started to quietly pray.
Wait, Tom? It's a person. No, it's 3 people. And one of them is old Muff Potter. I can hear his drunken voice. I'm not afraid of him. And I know that other voice, Huck. It's Indian Joe. Now, him I am afraid of. Let's go, Tom.
But it was too late now. The men had already reached the grave, Hoss Williams' grave.
Here we are, men.
Tom didn't recognize this voice, but he looked around the tree and saw that it was Dr. Robinson. Tom was afraid to breathe for fear that the men might hear him.
Okay, now start digging,
he said. After a short while, the men pulled up Hoss's box from the ground. Potter then spoke to the doctor.
Now we'll carry it away for you for $5 more. If not, then we'll just leave it right here. I've already paid you enough,
the doctor said.
No, you'll pay us more, because it was your father who sent me to jail when I was younger. Your family owes me,
said Indian Joe. The doctor became angry and hit Indian Joe. Muff Potter was so surprised by this, he dropped his knife. Then he started to fight with the doctor. Indian Joe had seen Potter drop his knife, so when the 2 men started to fight, he picked it up and waited for the right moment to use it on the doctor. The opportunity came when the doctor turned his back on Indian Joe and hit Potter with a board, who fell quickly to the ground. Indian Joe didn't wait. He immediately put the blade of the knife into the doctor's back. The doctor suddenly stopped fighting and fell on top of Potter. Tom and Huck quietly ran away without being seen. Potter was still asleep when Indian Joe put the knife he'd used to kill the doctor in his hand. When he finally woke up, he first saw Indian Joe sitting near him. Then he saw the doctor's body, and lastly, he saw the knife in his own hand. It was covered with blood.
I can't believe you killed him,
said Indian Joe.
What? I didn't kill anyone,
replied Potter, still surprised by what he'd woken up to.
I saw the whole thing, Potter. After he hit you, you used your knife on him. But don't worry, Muff. I won't tell anyone.
Potter started crying.
Thank you, Joe. I knew you were a good friend. Now you've got to get out of here before someone sees you.
Indian Joe watched Muff Potter run away and laughed to himself, saying,
Well, it looks like he was too drunk to remember to take his knife with him.
Chapter 10. The Agreement. Tom and Huck didn't look back the whole time they ran, and they didn't stop running until they reached the village. Then they went into an old empty building to hide for a while.
I can't believe what we just saw. Do you think the doctor's dead, Huck? If he is, then Indian Joe will be hanged.
Tom thought for a moment and said,
But we're the only people who know he did it. Oh, you're right. I didn't think about that. If we tell, Indian Joe may kill us. Well, maybe we won't have to tell. Maybe Muff Potter will. But, Huck, Muff Potter didn't see what happened after the doctor hit him. Tom, we must agree never to tell anyone. Let's write our agreement in blood.
Tom agreed, and with his knife he cut both his and Huckleberry's hands and wrote their agreement on a piece of wood.
Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer promise they will never tell about what they saw, and if they ever tell, they will die immediately.
Then each boy signed in blood, T.S. and H.F. Tom wrote the H and F, since Huckleberry couldn't read or write. They then put the wood in a hole in the wall of the building and said goodbye to each other for the night. The sun was just about to rise when Tom finally arrived home. He had entered through the window as usual and felt safe that his aunt hadn't heard him, but Sid heard him, and as always, he couldn't wait to tell Aunt Polly at breakfast. When Tom joined Sid and his aunt at the breakfast table, Aunt Polly began to cry and complained that he was always making her sad. "No matter how hard I try to make you a good boy, you always do bad things." Tom hated to see his aunt cry. It made him feel terrible about himself. He promised her that he would be good from now on, but his aunt didn't seem to believe him. His day only went worse when he went to school, for the teacher used his stick on both Tom and Joe for missing school the day before. And when Tom sat down in his classroom chair, he found a piece of paper with something wrapped in it waiting for him. He opened it and found the little gold ball he'd given Becky the other day. This was becoming one of the worst days in Tom's life. Chapter 11. Potter's Capture. At 12 o'clock, the teacher told his students that school was closing early for the day. All of the children were surprised and excited by the news, except for Tom. He knew it was because the doctor's body had been found and that the whole village was talking about it now. Tom heard some people saying that the police found Potter's knife next to the body, and someone had said that they'd seen Potter washing himself in the river this morning and that he'd run away when he noticed he was being watched. This surprised most people because Muff never seemed to care about washing himself before today. Tom found many people gathered at the graveyard. He felt uncomfortable there, and he felt even worse when he saw Huckleberry there. They tried not to look at each other for fear that someone might suspect them of knowing something. Then Tom saw Indian Joe. He was surprised to see him at the scene of the crime. A group of policemen soon appeared, and with them they had Muff Potter. Potter looked frightened. When they brought him to the grave where the murder happened, he fell to the ground, crying,
"Please, I'm telling you I didn't do it. I could never kill a man." "No one said you did,"
someone from the crowd said. Potter realized that it was Indian Joe who had spoken.
"But you told me you wouldn't tell, Indian Joe."
The police showed Potter the knife and asked him if it was his. He dropped his head and admitted that it was. He started shaking and looked up at Indian Joe again.
"You know I didn't do it, Indian Joe. You were there. Tell them I didn't do it."
The police asked Indian Joe what he knew. He told them what he saw. and Tom expected God would kill Indian Joe right there for lying, but nothing happened. Tom wanted to tell the truth, but he knew he'd be killed if he did. It bothered Tom that an innocent man was going to be punished and that he couldn't do anything about it. This idea stayed in his mind all week. He couldn't sleep at night, and if he did sleep, he had terrible dreams and he said things out loud. Sid said he'd heard Tom one night saying,
"Blood! Blood! Please don't kill me, please!"
"What's upsetting you, Tom?" asked Aunt Polly. "Something's on your mind and you need to talk about it."
"It's nothing, Auntie."
But Tom's face had turned white when she asked him this question. During this period of time, Tom visited Potter's window at the jail every day and gave him a small gift to try to make him feel better. He wasn't sure if it helped Potter, but certainly helped Tom. Because Indian Joe had been digging up Hoss Williams's grave, most of the people of the village wanted to put him in jail too. But they feared that this would just anger him, and he might, later on, punish those who'd put him in jail a second time. So Indian Joe remained free. Chapter 12. Aunt Polly Studies Medicine. Now Tom had something else to worry about, other than Indian Joe. It seemed that Becky Thatcher had become ill. Tom was afraid that it might be very serious. He became very much unlike himself. He didn't want to do anything except think about Becky. This worried his aunt. She wanted to make him feel better, so she started reading books about keeping healthy. These books offered all kinds of advice, such as what you should and shouldn't eat, drink, and wear. She was so worried about Tom's health that she was willing to try anything and everything the book suggested. So, one morning, she pulled Tom out of bed and took him into the garden and poured cold water over his head. Then she put him back into bed and covered him up with a lot of blankets. This, of course, didn't improve the situation, so she tried other things, like giving him less food and making him stay in bed longer. Then she tried a new medicine called painkiller. When she gave it to Tom, it seemed like she'd started a fire in his mouth. He yelled and jumped up and down. She thought this might be a good thing, so she started to give him painkiller every day. Of course, all of her attempts at helping Tom only made him feel worse. He wished that she would stop trying to make him feel better. He knew that he couldn't continue to take the painkiller anymore. So, when his aunt wasn't looking, he started putting the medicine in a hole in the floor, instead of in his mouth. Now she could give him as much painkiller as she wanted. He even told her that he liked it. This made his aunt very happy. One day, as Tom was putting the painkiller in the hole in the floor, Peter the cat came into his room to visit. Peter became very interested in what Tom was doing. He started to smell the hole in the floor, and it seemed to Tom that he wanted to try the painkiller.
"I don't know, Peter. I'm not so sure you'd like this."
Peter didn't seem to believe Tom, because he kept smelling around the hole in the floor.
"Well, okay. If you want to try it, I guess I can let you. But don't get angry with me if you don't like it."
So he fed Peter some of the medicine. The cat went absolutely crazy. He screamed loudly and ran all round the room, jumping from bed to chair, to table to dresser, and back to the bed again. Then he jumped to the ground and rolled around on his back like a drunken man. He continued to do this until Aunt Polly came running into the room. Then he jumped to his feet and ran screaming out the window. Tom couldn't stop laughing. This was one of the funniest things he'd seen since the dog in church. Now, what is wrong with that cat, Tom?
Oh, he's just excited, Auntie. You know how cats are.
But Tom had forgotten to cover the hole where he put the painkiller, and his aunt saw it now. She quickly became angry and started hitting Tom. "You terrible boy! How can you give that to a cat?"
I'm sorry, Auntie. I just wanted the cat to feel like someone cared about him, like you cared about me.
What do you mean?
He doesn't have an aunt who gives him medicine that hurts his mouth. So maybe he doesn't feel anyone cares about him.
This made Aunt Polly think for a moment. She suddenly realized how painful the painkiller might be for Tom. She took Tom's hand and said, "I'm sorry, Tom. I just wanted you to feel better."
And I was trying to do the same for Peter. It looks like it worked. He was more active a few minutes ago than I've seen him be all year.
All right now, Tom. You be a good boy and get going to school. Tom had been going to school early every day since Becky became ill. Today, as he waited at the front gate, hoping she might come, he saw Jeff Thatcher come walking by the school. Tom became excited, but soon fell back into sadness when he realized that Jeff was alone. He gave up and went inside, feeling terrible. Then, suddenly he noticed out of the corner of his eye, a dress came walking into the classroom, just before the teacher was about to begin. It was Becky. Tom almost jumped out of his seat with excitement. He immediately became his old self again and started playing and joking with the other students. He did his usual tricks to try to get Becky to look at him, but she never did. He did everything he could to get her attention. He stole a boy's hat, walked on his hands again, and finally fell right at Becky's feet. But she just turned and looked the other way, pretending she never saw him. This made Tom's heart weak again. He picked himself up off the ground and, with his head down, slowly walked away.